You're not exactly impressive, Maya. That was the last thing he said before shutting the door behind him. I stood there on the porch, the night wind stinging my cheeks, not because of the cold, but because of the heat rising in my face. Humiliation, embarrassment, heartbreak, it all rolled into one sickening knot in my throat. I didn't say anything. I didn't chase after him. I just stood still, clutching the little envelope in my hand, the one I was planning to give him. A letter filled with love, forgiveness, and dreams of our future. He never opened it, never even looked at it. Instead, he looked me up and down like I was a misfit puzzle piece in his picture-perfect world and muttered those 5 words. You're not exactly impressive, Maya. Then he walked away like I never mattered. And for a long time I believed him. For a long time, I let myself stay small. I wasn't always like this. There was a time I used to speak with my whole chest, dream with both hands, and walk into rooms believing I belonged there. I wasn't always small. But somehow, slowly, inch by inch, I let myself shrink. Maybe it started long before Ethan. Maybe it started at home. My family, the quiet wounds. I grew up in a modest town outside of Denver, Colorado, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and reputation stuck like old gum on a school desk. My parents, Helen and Richard Bennett, were the practical type. They didn't believe in fluff. Dreams were fine as long as they fit within a spreadsheet. I was the middle child, always sandwiched between my older brother Tyler, the golden boy with straight A's and a baseball scholarship, and my younger sister Chloe, who was the miracle baby born after miscarriage and carried like a glass doll. I was steady, reliable, easy to overlook. No one meant harm. Not exactly. But there were moments that stuck with me. Like the time I brought home a drawing in 3rd grade, an entire world I'd sketched from imagination, a city in the clouds, and my mom looked at it and said, "You're sweet, honey. But what are you going to do with that?" Or the day I got 3rd place in the state essay contest, and no one came to the ceremony because Tyler had a practice game. Not even a real game. Just practice. Those things add up. They tell you, in invisible ink, your background music. Not the main act. The first time I met Ethan. I was 24, fresh out of college with a communications degree and working in a marketing internship that barely paid enough for rent. I met Ethan at a networking mixer in downtown Denver. He was 6 years older, confident, and already working full-time at an ad agency. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he laughed, the room adjusted to his mood. And when he talked to me, I felt seen. Your voice is calm but smart, he said, sipping his gin and tonic. It makes people want to listen. No one had ever told me that before. Ethan had this gravitational pull. He wore confidence like a tailored suit, and I mistook that for wisdom. Charm can be so deceptive when you've spent your whole life waiting to be noticed. Our first few months were like a movie montage. Late-night takeout, city drives, deep conversations under fairy lights on his balcony. I told him about my dreams of writing a children's book someday. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and said, "That's cute." Cute. That should have been a red flag. But I was too busy soaking up the attention. Finally, I wasn't invisible. Finally, someone looked at me like I mattered. Slowly becoming smaller. The changes didn't happen overnight. They never do. It started with subtle things. He didn't like my laugh when I was really excited, said it was a bit much. He suggested I wear more neutrals. Colors are kind of loud, babe. When I got a job offer at a rival firm, he said, "Sure, but that place is high pressure. Are you sure you can handle it?" He always said it with a smile. A hand on my back. A tone that sounded like concern. I mistook control for care. So I dimmed my light for him. I wore beige and navy. I spoke softer. I let him order for me at restaurants. I shelved my book idea. I didn't notice how much of me was disappearing. I just knew I wanted to keep him happy. Every time I shared an accomplishment, a campaign I'd led, a comment from my boss, he found a way to reframe it. "That's nice, but next time try not to overthink things. Keep it simple." Or, "Yeah, but that's kind of expected at your level." It wasn't always mean. That's the hard part. He wasn't cruel, just dismissive. He never yelled. He just minimized. And somehow, that made it harder to name the hurt. It wasn't abuse, was it? He just wanted to help me grow. That's what he said, at least. That I was too soft for the real world. That he was just trying to make me stronger. So I swallowed his words and nodded. My friend saw it. Tara, my college roommate, pulled me aside one day and said, "You don't smile the way you used to." I laughed it off. "I'm just tired." "No," she said, holding eye contact. "You're smaller." I brushed her off. Told her Ethan was supportive. Told myself she was just being dramatic. Because admitting the truth meant undoing everything I'd built. The proposal that wasn't. We'd been dating for 3 years when Ethan took me to a vineyard for my birthday. Everyone expected a proposal. Even I did. I'd bought a new dress. Got my nails done. I was sure he'd ask. Instead, over wine and candlelight, he looked at me and said, "I think we should take a break. You've been a bit stagnant lately." Stagnant. Like I was a pond. I remember smiling politely. I even nodded. I made it through the dinner. I thanked him for being honest. Then I got in the Uber and cried silently the whole ride home. Why I stayed so long. This is the part no one understands. Why stay with someone who made you feel small? Because sometimes, when you've been invisible your whole life, even small feels like something. Because he made me feel chosen. Even if it was conditional. Because I thought love was supposed to be earned, not given freely. The last conversation. 1 week before the final break, I tried to open up to him. I told him I felt like I was losing myself. He smiled, brushed my hair back, and said, "Maya, if you don't like who you are, then change. Don't put that on me." That was the moment the floor cracked beneath me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just sat there. And inside, something quiet shifted. A seed planted. A whisper. This isn't love. The setup to the hook. The night he told me I wasn't impressive? That wasn't a random moment. That was the crescendo of years of quiet erosion. I'd driven to his place to talk. I had written him a letter. Not begging him to come back, but explaining how much I had tried to grow. How much I loved him. I was hoping. I don't even know what I was hoping. But before I could hand him the letter, he looked at me, really looked, and said, "You're not exactly impressive, Maya." That was the last thing he said to me. After Ethan shut the door that night, I stood there for what felt like hours. Of course, it was just minutes. Maybe less. But time bends when your heart is cracking. I walked back to my car in silence, the unopened letter still in my hand. I didn't cry, not yet. I'd learned to hold tears in like secrets. Especially with Ethan. Especially with people who mistake softness for weakness. I tossed the letter in the passenger seat. I didn't go back to my apartment. I just drove. Past familiar corners, past the grocery store we always went to on Sundays, past the park bench where we once talked about baby names, like we were building something real. Eventually, I parked outside a 24-hour diner and just sat there in the dark, watching strangers come and go. That was the night I started asking myself, what if I really have been small all along? The weeks that followed. I didn't hear from him after that night. No apology. No explanation. Not even a lazy "hope you're okay" text. He vanished. Blocked me on social media. Didn't answer when I called. After 3 days of silence, I left one final voicemail. "Hey, I'm not calling to beg. I need to understand what happened. That's all. Please." I never got a response. And slowly, my world began shrinking around the absence. Friends picking sides. I lost more than a boyfriend. I lost parts of my circle too. Some of them, like Tara, stayed loyal. She came over with donuts and face masks, ready to remind me who I was before him. But others? They started acting weird. Quiet. One mutual friend, Jessica, finally said it outright. "I mean, you guys weren't really on the same level, Maya. He's just farther along career-wise. Maybe it was never going to work." I didn't say anything. But I never forgot that sentence. The nail in the coffin. It wasn't one moment. It was a series of little humiliations. I found out through LinkedIn that he had been promoted, creative director. I found out through someone's tag story that he was dating again, a woman named Rachel. Blonde. Polished. The kind of woman who looked like she belonged at country clubs and Sunday brunches with mimosas. What really stung? She worked at the same firm that rejected me last year. He once said, "You're just not corporate polished enough for those kinds of places." But apparently she was. My mother's voice. 2 weeks after the breakup, I visited home. I hadn't told my parents about Ethan. I didn't want their reaction. But of course, my mom found out. Chloe had seen something on social media and spilled the beans. We were doing dishes when she brought it up. "So, Ethan's moved on already." I froze. She added, "Well, that's men for you. Maybe next time you won't make it so easy for them." I dried my hands, walked to my old room, and shut the door. I wasn't surprised. I was just tired. Tired of being reminded that somehow I had failed. Internal collapse. The worst part of rejection isn't the leaving. It's the silence that follows. The echo chamber in your head that keeps playing every moment over again. Every word he said. Every time you adjusted your tone or outfit or dream just to fit better into his world. I stopped showing up to team meetings with ideas. I stopped writing in my journal. I stopped singing along in the car. I wasn't heartbroken. I was erased. Everyone had something to say. Coworkers, "You'll bounce back. You're strong." Friends, "Honestly, he did you a favor. You'll find someone better." Family, "Well, you always were a bit emotional. Maybe now you can toughen up." No one said, "That was cruel." No one said, "You didn't deserve that." The breaking point. One evening, I ran into Ethan's sister, Callie, at a bookstore. We'd never been close, but we were friendly. She looked surprised to see me.
"Oh.
"Hey, Maya." I nodded. "Hey." She hesitated, then said, "Ethan said you weren't doing so well, that you kinda spiraled after the breakup." My stomach turned. "He said that?"
Yeah.
I mean, he said it with love, like he's worried. He just said you took it hard, and he felt like he was holding you back from reaching your potential. I smiled.
Right.
Of course. I left the store without buying anything. That was it for me. That was the moment I stopped trying to be understood. That was the moment something inside me quietly snapped. A shift. That night, I stood in front of the mirror.
Still in my office clothes.
Hair pulled back. Mascara smudged under tired eyes. I stared at myself for a long time. Then I whispered, almost out loud, "What if he was wrong? What if I wasn't the small one? What if he just needed me to believe that so he could feel big?" And just like that, I logged off Instagram. I deleted his number. I archived all the photos. I didn't cry. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't grieving him. I was grieving the parts of me I gave up just to stay loved. That's when I knew. I didn't want him back. I wanted me back. And I was going to find her. I didn't announce it. There was no social media post. No dramatic message. No, "I'm cutting people off for my piece" caption. I just left. Quietly. Deliberately. For the first time in my life, I chose silence not as a way to disappear, but as a way to reclaim space. The first steps. The first thing I did was cancel the automatic payment I'd been sending my mom every month. Not because I didn't love her, but because I realized she only ever called when it bounced. The next thing I did? I changed my number. That one hurt more than I expected, because I'd had the same number since high school. It had carried texts from my first crush, late-night chats with Tara, and 1,000 silent "Are you okay?" check-ins I never replied to. But that number also meant access for people who only reached out when they needed something. So I let it go. Social media detox. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. All gone. Not deactivated. Deleted. No more curated images. No more stalking Ethan's new life. No more watching Rachel post stories from the same sushi place he once took me to on my birthday. I didn't want to see the life I had been replaced in. And more importantly, I didn't want to keep comparing my healing to anyone else's highlight reel. The apartment reset. My apartment had become a shrine to a version of me I didn't recognize anymore. Neutral throw blankets because Ethan hated patterns. Frame typography art that read "Work hard, stay humble," a phrase he loved. Books he recommended. Wines he liked. The scent of sandalwood in every corner because he once said, "It makes the space feel grown up." I threw it all out. Then I took a trip to a thrift store and bought the loudest, brightest orange armchair I could find. I placed it by the window and started calling it my sunrise chair. It made no sense. It made me happy. The return of rituals. Before Ethan, I had rituals. I used to write one page of fiction every morning before work. I used to leave voice notes for myself with tiny affirmations. "You are becoming." I used to light a candle when I cooked, even if it was just mac and cheese. Somewhere along the way, I stopped doing all of that. Because he called them quirks. Because he said I was wasting time. So I brought them back. One by one. I started writing again, not for publishing, just for me. I whispered affirmations while washing dishes. I danced while folding laundry. Little things. Holy things. Things that reminded me I was still here. Work was the last thing to change. At the agency, I had always played it safe. I spoke up just enough. Took on just enough. Smiled just enough. Because Ethan once said, "Don't rock the boat. You'll stand out for the wrong reasons."
But now?
Now I started showing up like I believed in my own ideas. I pitched bold campaigns. I took risks. I said no when I meant no, and yes, only when I meant it. My boss, Angela, pulled me aside one day and said, "Maya, I don't know what shifted, but your energy lately, it's powerful." And I smiled. Because it was. Friends didn't know what to do with me. Some tried to pull me back into my old shell. They missed the Maya who nodded along. The Maya who played therapist. The Maya who made herself small to keep the room comfortable. But I wasn't her anymore.
And I wasn't sorry.
So I let some group chats go quiet. I let some invitations expire. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. I realized I didn't owe my presence to anyone who didn't value my fullness. Unexpected peace. What surprised me most was how quiet it got. And how good that felt. No more second-guessing texts. No more overthinking silence. No more managing other people's emotions like unpaid labor. For the first time in years, I woke up and didn't feel anxious about who I needed to please. I made breakfast for myself and ate it on my sunrise chair. I read books without underlining them to seem deep. I laughed, loud, unfiltered, unapologetic. I wasn't performing anymore. I was just existing. And existing felt revolutionary. A message from Ethan's friend. One night, around midnight, I got a message from an old mutual, Jacob, one of Ethan's work buddies. It read, "Hey, not trying to stir anything up. Just wanted to say, I ran into Ethan. He mentioned you've been ghosting everyone." He seemed almost offended. "Anyway, just thought it was wild how he still talks about you like you owe him something." I stared at that message for a while. Then I deleted it. Because I didn't need to respond. Because I didn't owe him anything. Not even an explanation. A new kind of silence. This silence? It wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It was spacious. It was full of possibility. It was the kind of silence that lets wildflowers grow. That's what I was becoming. A woman who used to be small, now learning how to bloom. There was a moment, clear as crystal, etched in my memory forever. It was a chilly morning in early February. I had just finished submitting a grant proposal for a young women's leadership initiative I'd designed through my graduate program at NYU. I remember standing at the window of my tiny Brooklyn apartment, fingers trembling from the adrenaline and too much coffee, watching the city hustle by. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Liam. "So, now you think you're some kind of leader? Just don't get ahead of yourself, Emily. You're not that impressive." That was the last straw. I stared at those words, a slow burn rising in my chest. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was just done. Done giving my energy to someone who thrived on minimizing me. Done second-guessing my steps because he might scoff. Done shrinking so he could feel tall. I blocked his number that day. Not out of rage, but because I finally realized I didn't owe him a front row seat to my journey anymore. And that choice, that quiet, powerful choice, was the beginning of everything. Suddenly, the energy I had spent trying to prove myself to Liam, trying to twist into shapes that fit his fragile masculinity, was free. I poured it into my thesis. I spent late nights at the library, studying how emotional intelligence and mentorship shaped young women's success in underprivileged communities. My professors noticed. One of them nominated me for a fellowship I hadn't even known existed. By May, I was selected to present at a youth summit in Washington, D.C. I remember standing backstage in a white blazer I'd bought secondhand and tailored myself. My palms were sweaty, but my voice was steady. When I stepped up to the microphone, I looked out at a crowd of nonprofit leaders, educators, and students. And I told them the truth. I told them about the girl who had once believed her voice was too small to matter. And I told them how wrong she had been. I didn't mention Liam by name, but in my heart, I was speaking directly to that shadow I had finally left behind. Afterward, a girl named Maya came up to me, 16, shy, with braids and a soft voice. "You made me feel like maybe I can do it too," she whispered. And that, right there, was my turning point. Not the applause. Not the LinkedIn endorsements or the professor who told me I had real potential. It was Maya. Because for the first time, I saw that my growth wasn't just about me escaping someone who made me feel small. It was about making space for others to grow too. Liam had once been the loudest voice in my head.
But now?
He was fading.
Distant.
Irrelevant. And in his place were voices like Maya's. Voices of women who were rising.
Healing.
Believing. That winter morning when I blocked Liam, I didn't know it would be the pivot that launched my real life. But looking back, it was the moment I stepped into myself, no longer defined by someone else's insecurity. I had grown, and I was still growing. But now, I wasn't looking for permission. A year and a half after leaving Mason behind, I found myself back in my hometown not to stay but to speak at a Women in STEM conference at my old high school. Just being back in that building brought a whirlwind of emotion. I remembered walking those same halls feeling invisible. Now, I was returning as the keynote speaker, with my name printed in bold on banners hung in the auditorium. Harper Bennett, the same girl who once believed she wasn't enough. As I stood behind the podium that afternoon, I scanned the room. Rows of young girls stared up at me, with wide eyes. Some had braces, others clutched notebooks. A few looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, but I recognized the doubt behind their eyes. It was the same doubt that once lived inside me. "My name is Harper," I began, my voice steady, and for a long time, I believed I had to shrink myself to be loved. I believed I had to be quiet, agreeable, pretty, but never too smart, never too opinionated, and certainly never ambitious. There was a pause as I let the silence hang, heavy and real. But that version of me? She was just trying to survive. Today, I don't shrink myself for anyone. I show up fully. And I want each of you to know, you don't have to wait for someone else to validate your worth. You were never small. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see your brilliance. The applause was unexpected.
Loud.
Affirming. My eyes misted, but I held back tears. I had never spoken about Mason publicly, but in a way, that entire speech was about him. About how someone once convinced me I was less, and how I chose to become more anyway. After the talk, a few teachers approached me. Even Principal Daniels, who barely remembered me, shook my hand and asked for a photo. Then came a girl, no older than 16, who whispered, "Thank you. I needed that more than you know." And that made everything worth it. As I was packing up to leave, I heard a voice behind me. Familiar. Unmistakable. Harper. I turned. There he was. Mason. Time had weathered him in ways I didn't expect. He wasn't the charming, polished boy I once idolized. He looked ordinary, slightly tired. His smile was uncertain. "I saw your name on the flyer," he said, stuffing his hands into his coat pockets. "Didn't know if it was really you." "It is," I said with a nod. "Hi, Mason." There was an awkward pause before he said, "You're doing big things, huh?" I nodded. "I am." I watched your talk, he admitted. You were incredible. I didn't realize that I had it in me. I interrupted softly. He gave a weak smile. Something like that. Another silence. Then he said, I was an idiot. I didn't treat you the way you deserved. I just wanted you to know that. I offered a polite smile, not cold, not warm, just neutral. Thank you, Mason, I said. I've moved on, but I appreciate the apology. He nodded, eyes downcast. You look happy. I am. And I was. Not because he regretted it. Not because I'd finally proven something. But because his presence didn't affect me anymore. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure. I had already healed. He made me feel small, but I grew without him. The months passed, and every seed I had planted in my heart finally blossomed. My art career took off after a local journalist featured me in a full-page story. Aspen Blake, the Phoenix of Portland. The headline read, that single article opened the floodgates. I was invited to showcase at regional galleries, collaborate on community murals, and speak at a youth mentorship event. My inbox overflowed with offers, support, and stories from women who had walked through the same fires I had. And then, on a warm June morning, I got the email that nearly made me drop my coffee. The San Francisco Contemporary Art Society wanted to fly me out for a solo exhibition. It was a dream I never dared to say aloud back when I was with Nathan, because I'd been told dreams like that weren't realistic. But here it was. Real.
Mine.
As I walked through the sleek gallery space weeks later, overseeing the final setup, I wore a soft smile. Each canvas on the wall told a chapter of my survival. There was the one painted entirely in reds and blacks, the before. Another in soft blues and fierce golds, the becoming. And finally, a massive piece of sunflowers breaking through concrete. I called it Growth is Loud. People lingered in front of that one the longest. I stood near the back during opening night, watching guests murmur and gaze and feel something.
I didn't need to be in the spotlight.
My art spoke for me now, louder and clearer than I ever had when I was under someone else's thumb. And then I saw him, Nathan, standing near the refreshment table in a charcoal gray blazer, holding a glass of wine he probably couldn't pronounce, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me. For a fleeting second, our eyes locked. And in that moment I didn't feel rage, or fear, or heartbreak. I felt tall, because the version of me he once belittled didn't exist anymore. I had outgrown her. And him. He approached. Aspen, he said, voice low, almost reverent. I saw the article. I had to come. You're incredible. I smiled politely. Thank you, Nathan. I hope you enjoy the show. Then I turned and walked away. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need closure from him. I was already complete. I never expected to see him again. But life, with its strange sense of timing, brought us face to face one fall afternoon at a charity gala in downtown Chicago. I had been invited as a guest speaker for a panel on women in leadership, and as I stood backstage reviewing my notes, I heard his voice. I turned, and there he was. Ethan. He looked different, older, maybe a bit tired and oddly smaller. Not physically, but energetically. It was the first time I had truly seen him as just a man, not the towering figure he once was in my world. Emily, he asked, his tone unsure, almost reverent. I nodded, calm. I felt no panic, no fluster. I wasn't that girl anymore. I heard you were speaking tonight. I didn't know if you'd come, he said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. Why wouldn't I? This is what I do now, I said gently, not with pride, just truth. He looked down. You look strong. I smiled. I am. He hesitated, then said, I just want you to know, I was wrong. About everything. I didn't think you had it in you, and I realize now, I was projecting my own fears onto you. I nodded slowly. There was a time I would have hung onto every word, seeking validation.
But now?
I didn't need his apology to feel whole. It took me a long time to realize I didn't need someone else to believe in me to succeed. I had to believe in myself, I said, softly but firmly. He looked up, meeting my eyes. You've come so far. I had to, I replied. Because you made me feel small. And I couldn't stay small just to make you comfortable. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was healing. He nodded slowly, as if finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done and what I had done since. Later that night, I took the stage. I spoke to a room full of women, mentors, dreamers. I shared my story, not as a victim of someone else's limited view, but as a woman who rose in spite of it. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. And for the first time, I truly felt it. Not just the success, not just the growth, but the peace that comes from knowing you don't need anyone's permission to take up space. And that is how I turned my pain into purpose. Looking back, I'm no longer angry at Derek. I'm thankful, because without the way he belittled me, I wouldn't have been forced to face myself. I wouldn't have learned to rebuild from rock bottom. I wouldn't have chased my degree, launched my design firm, or become the kind of woman who walks into a room and doesn't shrink, she shines. Derek once made me feel small, but it was his absence that taught me how to grow. So, to anyone watching this who's ever been made to feel like they weren't enough, remember this. You are not too sensitive. You are not too ambitious. You are not too much. You are a garden in full bloom. You are the sunrise after a long storm. You are growth, wild, unstoppable, and beautifully your own. Don't ever wait for someone else to believe in you. Believe in yourself first. Because once you do, no one, not even someone who once made you feel small, can dim the power of who you are becoming. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear, you are worthy. You are powerful. And your glow up is just beginning.